There is a version of you that is still angry about something that happened 5 years ago. There is a version of you still checking a phone that will never ring again, still replaying a conversation that ended badly, still gripping tightly to a job, a relationship, an image of yourself that no longer exists. The Stoics had a name for this suffering, and they had a cure for it too. It is not forgetting. It is not pretending you don't care. It is something far more powerful and far more difficult. It is the discipline of letting go. 2,000 years ago, a Roman emperor sat alone in his tent on the edge of a battlefield and wrote himself a single, brutal reminder. You do not control what happens to you, you only control how you respond to it. That emperor was and the words he wrote to himself in the dark became one of the most quietly devastating books ever written. Around the same time, a man born into slavery, who had been crippled by a master's cruelty, was teaching some of the most powerful men in Rome that freedom had nothing to do with circumstance and everything to do with the mind. His name was Epictetus, and his core teaching was simple enough to fit on a single line. Yet most people spend their whole lives failing to live it. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Between those two men, and a wealthy statesman named Seneca, who wrote letters on the shortness of life while facing his own death sentence, an entire philosophy was built around one radical idea, that peace is not something you find outside yourself. It is something you build by releasing your grip on everything that you were never meant to hold in the first place. This is the discipline of letting go, and today we are going to walk through exactly what it means, why it is so hard, and how you can start practicing it, starting today. Before we go any further, if you find value in what the old Stoics have to teach us about living a calmer, freer, more intentional life, take a moment right now to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps this message reach more people who need it, and it costs you nothing but a second of your time. Now, let's get into it. Letting go sounds like a soft idea. It sounds like something you'd find printed on a throw pillow or whispered in a yoga class. But the Stoics did not treat it as a soft idea at all. They treated it as one of the hardest and most essential disciplines a human being could ever practice, because they understood something that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. Almost everything that causes us pain is not the event itself, but our refusal to accept that the event has already happened and is no longer within our power to change. Epictetus opened his famous handbook, the Enchiridion, with a distinction that sounds almost too simple to matter, and yet it is the foundation of the entire philosophy. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, in short, everything that is our own doing, these are up to us. Our body, our property, our reputation, our position in the world, these are not up to us. The moment you truly understand this distinction, and I mean understand it in your bones, not just as a clever quote you repeat at parties, your entire relationship with suffering begins to change. Think about the last time you were genuinely miserable. Not mildly annoyed, but truly weighed down, unable to sleep, replaying something over and over in your mind. Chances are, if you look closely, the misery was not coming from the event itself. It was coming from your resistance to the event. A relationship ended, and you were not just grieving, you were fighting reality, wishing it had gone differently, running alternate versions of the story in your head where you said the right thing, where they didn't leave, where the outcome was different. A friend betrayed your trust, and the pain was not just in the betrayal, it was in the endless mental loop of why would they do this? How could they do this? This shouldn't have happened. You lost a job you were proud of, and the suffering multiplied itself because you kept comparing your current reality to the one you thought you were supposed to be living. In every one of these cases, the event happened once, in the past, in a single moment. But the suffering kept happening, over and over, because your mind refused to let go of the story it had built around what should have been. But this is precisely what the Stoics were pointing at when they talked about the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is often unavoidable. You will lose people. You will fail at things you care about. Your body will age and eventually stop working the way it once did. Plans will fall apart. People will disappoint you. This is simply the terrain of being alive, and no philosophy, no amount of positive thinking, no amount of manifesting or discipline will change that basic fact. But suffering, the prolonged, repetitive, self-inflicted anguish that so many of us carry around for years, sometimes decades, that is optional. That is the tax we pay for refusing to let go. Marcus Aurelius, sitting in his tent, surrounded by war, disease, the death of his own children, wrote to himself again and again that the obstacle is not the events themselves, but our judgments about them. He reminded himself that a cucumber is bitter. Throw it away. There are briars in the path. Turn aside from them. That is all you need to say. He was not being cold or dismissive of real hardship. He was reminding himself daily, in the middle of unimaginable pressure, that his mind was the one thing that remained entirely his, and that if he let external events dictate his inner state, he had handed over the only kingdom he actually owned. So how do we actually practice this? How do we move from understanding the idea intellectually to living it? The Stoics were remarkably practical people, and they gave us tools, not just theories. The first and most foundational tool is what modern teachers now call the dichotomy of control, but which Epictetus simply called the discipline of desire. Every single day, you are bombarded with things that pull at your attention and your emotions. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A colleague takes credit for your work. The economy shifts and your investments dip. A loved one gets sick. Before you react to any of these, the Stoic practice asks you to pause and ask one question. Is this within my control? If the answer is no, and it very often is no, then your only job is to accept it as quickly and completely as possible and redirect your energy toward the one thing that remains entirely yours, which is your response. Control the traffic, but you can control whether you spend the next 20 minutes fuming or whether you use the time to listen to something that nourishes your mind. You cannot control whether someone else recognizes your effort, but you can control whether you continue to do good work regardless of recognition. Control illness, but you can control how you show up for the people you love while it is happening. This is not resignation. This is not the same as giving up or becoming passive in the face of injustice or hardship. This is a crucial distinction that gets lost in modern, watered-down interpretations of Stoicism. Letting go, in the Stoic sense, does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you stop trying to improve your circumstances, and it certainly does not mean you become a doormat who accepts mistreatment without response. Marcus Aurelius commanded armies. Seneca was deeply involved in the politics of Rome. Epictetus ran a school and taught actively for decades. These were not passive men who simply shrugged at the world. What they let go of was not effort, but attachment to outcomes they could not guarantee. They poured themselves fully into action, and then released their grip on the results, because clinging to a specific outcome, when so much of life is decided by forces outside your control, is a guaranteed recipe for anxiety and disappointment. There is a second tool the Stoics used that is just as powerful, and it involves time rather than control. It is the practice of memento mori, remembering that you will die. This might sound morbid at first, especially in a culture that goes to enormous lengths to avoid even thinking about mortality, let alone speaking of it directly. But for the Stoics, the awareness of death was not meant to depress you. It was meant to liberate you. Seneca wrote extensively about how most people live as though they have unlimited time, wasting years on grudges, on status games, on accumulating possessions they will never truly enjoy, all while the only truly finite resource they possess, their time, slips away unnoticed. When you genuinely sit with the fact that your life is short, and that none of us know exactly how short, it becomes almost absurd to spend your limited days gripping tightly to old resentments, replaying arguments from a decade ago, or refusing to speak to a sibling over a disagreement neither of you can even fully remember anymore. Memento mori is not about becoming obsessed with death. It is about using the fact of death as a filter, a way of asking yourself, is this grudge, this worry, this attachment, really worth the portion of my finite life I am currently spending on it? This brings us to one of the most difficult forms of letting go, which is letting go of other people, or more precisely, letting go of our expectations of other people. So much of our daily frustration comes not from what people actually do, but from the gap between what they did and what we expected or wanted them to do. Epictetus taught his students to expect people to act according to their own nature, the same way you would not be surprised or offended if a fig tree produced figs rather than olives. If someone is unkind, dishonest, or unreliable, and you already know this about them from experience, then their behavior should not shock you or destroy your peace when it happens again. This does not mean you must continue to associate with people who harm you. Quite the opposite. The Stoics were clear that you should remove yourself from toxic or destructive relationships when you can. But it does mean releasing the exhausting expectation that people will suddenly become different from who they have consistently shown you they are. Letting go here means releasing the fantasy version of a person you have been arguing with in your head and dealing instead with the real, limited, flawed human being in front of you, or simply walking away from them with a clear conscience rather than a bitter heart. Letting go of the past deserves its own space in this conversation because it might be the single heaviest weight most people carry without realizing it. We tell ourselves we have moved on from an old failure, an old heartbreak, an old mistake, and yet we notice that the smallest trigger, a song, a smell, a familiar street, brings the entire emotional weight rushing back as though no time has passed at all. The Stoics would say this happens because we never actually let go. We simply buried the story rather than releasing it. True letting go requires something the Stoics called examining your judgments. It is not enough to distract yourself from painful memories or numb them with busyness. You have to sit with the actual thought underneath the pain and ask whether it is even true. Often what we are truly mourning is not the event itself, but a judgment we have attached to it, a belief that we should have known better, that we are somehow permanently defined by our worst moment, that we deserved what happened to us. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that very little in life is inherently good or bad. It is our judgment about the thing that gives it its emotional charge. This does not mean pretending painful things were not painful. It means separating the raw event from the layers of self-punishing interpretation we have piled on top of it over the years, and slowly, deliberately, choosing to set those interpretations down. There is also the matter of letting go of who you thought you would become. This is perhaps one of the quieter, less discussed forms of Stoic release, but it touches almost everyone at some point in adulthood. Maybe you imagined a certain career by a certain age. Maybe you pictured a particular kind of family, a particular kind of success, a particular version of your own life that, for one reason or another, simply did not happen the way you planned. The grief that comes from this kind of unmet expectation is real, and dismissing it would be a disservice to anyone experiencing it. But the Stoic response is not to abandon ambition or to stop striving for a meaningful life. It is to recognize that so much of what we imagined for ourselves was never fully within our control to begin with, and that continuing to measure your present life against an imagined life that never existed is its own quiet form of suffering. Seneca wrote about how people constantly postpone actually living, telling themselves they will be happy once they reach some future milestone, and in doing so they let the present, the only moment they actually have any real power over, slip through their fingers entirely. Letting go, in this sense, means releasing the idealized life you never lived, so that you can be fully present in the one you are actually living right now. None of this is easy, and the Stoics never pretended it was. They were not offering a quick fix or a one-time realization that solves everything permanently. They described this as a discipline for a reason, something practiced daily, often imperfectly, for an entire lifetime. Marcus Aurelius was writing these reminders to himself as an old man, still working through the same lessons he had presumably been practicing for decades, because letting go is not a destination you arrive at once and never revisit. It is a muscle. Some days you will grip tightly to something you know you should release. Some days an old resentment will resurface uninvited, and you will find yourself right back in the exact emotional spiral you thought you had worked through years ago. This is not failure. This is simply what it means to be human, practicing a discipline that runs against the grain of our natural instincts to control, to cling, and to demand that reality conform to our preferences. If you want a practical starting point, the Stoics would suggest something remarkably simple. At the end of each day, take a few quiet minutes and ask yourself what you are currently holding on to that is not actually yours to hold. Is it an outcome you cannot control? Is it a person's opinion of you that you cannot change? Is it a version of the past that no longer exists anywhere except in your own memory? Is it a future you imagined that never came to pass? Name it honestly, without judgment, and then practice, even if only for a moment, the simple act of loosening your grip. You do not have to let go completely in a single sitting. Nobody does. But every time you notice the grip and consciously soften it, even slightly, you are practicing the discipline, and like any discipline, it grows stronger the more consistently you show up for it. What the Stoics ultimately offer us is not a promise that life will stop being difficult. Marcus Aurelius still had to bury children. Seneca still faced a forced death sentence from an emperor he had once tutored. Epictetus still lived with a body that had been permanently damaged by cruelty. None of them was spared the hard edges of being alive. What they cultivated instead was an unshakable inner freedom that had nothing to do with their circumstances and everything to do with where they chose to place their attention and their energy. They understood that the tighter you grip something that was never yours to keep, whether that is a person, an outcome, a past version of your life, or someone else's opinion of you, the more of your own peace you are handing over in the process. Letting go, then, is not about caring less. It is about finally directing your care toward the one thing that has always been entirely within your power, which is how you choose to meet whatever life brings you next. Dawned. If this video gave you something to sit with today, do two simple things before you go. Hit that like button so more people struggling with the exact same weight you might be carrying can find this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next piece of Stoic wisdom we bring you. Drop a comment below and tell us one thing you are ready to finally let go of. Thank you for spending this time with us, and until next time, hold on to what is truly yours and release the rest.